Welcome everyone to the online artist talk with Phillip Bandura and Hart. I'm Peter Flannery, the senior curator and collections manager here at the Canadian Clay and Glass Gallery. And we also have our assistant curator, Cheyenne Mapplebeck, who's going to be leading the discussion. I'm going to start with the land acknowledgement. We're joining from different places, artists from towards the West Coast with us today. But we acknowledge that the Canadian Clay and Glass Gallery is located on the traditional territory of the Attawandaron, Anishinaabe, and Haudenosaunee peoples. The gallery is situated on the Haldeman Tract, land promised to Six Nations in 1784 that includes 6 miles on each side of the Grand River. Yet today, the Six Nations reside on less than 5% of this unceded territory. Indigenous peoples have inhabited this land for thousands of years, and we respectfully and gratefully share this territory in peace and friendship. And we reaffirm our commitment to do the work, to unlearn and relearn towards a true reconciliation. Beyond the Threshold is one of our current exhibitions on now at the Canadian Clay and Glass Gallery through until January 11th, 2026. And it brings together the work of 18 artists from across the country who confront issues of homelessness, the housing crisis, food insecurity, and more through deeply personal and intersectional lenses. Their work speaks to the complex and often painful relationship between identity, place, and survival. And these stories are rooted in lived experience. Together, these artists offer a glance at what home can look like in the face of instability, change, and hope. Beyond the Threshold and the related programming, like this online talk that we're able to do, are made possible through the generous support of Armstrong Fine Art Services and a special anonymous donor. So we're grateful for their contributions to help bring this project to life and continue building those stories and experiences from the exhibition. And also, if you're visiting the gallery, we're also hosting a food drive in partnership with Waterloo Region Food Bank. So you can bring donations here until mid-December. The chat is open throughout the online talk, so feel free to type in any questions along the way. And with that, I will pass it off to Cheyenne.
Thank you so much, Peter. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for being here today to join us for this online discussion. As Peter mentioned, this discussion ties into our current exhibition, Beyond the Threshold. And today we're very fortunate to have 2 artists whose work is featured in Beyond the Threshold. So without further ado, I would like to introduce to you Hart and Phillip Bandura. Hart's work in Beyond the Threshold explores the uneasy boundary between domestic comfort and the wild creatures that share our spaces. They blur the lines between inside and outside, human and nature, and invite us to reconsider our homes as shared ecosystems and also to recognize our role within these ecosystems. And Phillip draws inspiration from the childhood wonder of imagination, referencing magic grow capsules and imaginings of saving our fragile ecosystems from human harm by shipping them off deep into space. And this is just a brief introduction. But today, both artists will be giving us a brief presentation of their work respectively, after which we are going to open things up to a discussion and a Q&A, and everybody is welcome to pop questions into the chat that they'd like our artists to engage with. Phillip has so generously offered to present first, so now I guess I'll open up the floor to you, Phillip, so you can get started. Thank you so much.
Thanks to the Canadian Clay and Glass Gallery for having me. I'm just going to share my screen here. Yeah, again, my name's Phillip Bandura, and I've decided to talk a little bit about the research that I did during my master's, and I looked at the queer qualities of glass and the glass community and how it sort of brought me to find a home within that community. And that then led me into the work that I was making. So I wanted to thank my parents. This is my mom, Irene, and my dad, Murray. This is my husband, David. They've all been very supportive. our cats, Oliver and Twist, and we actually just got a third cat, Patches, so she'll be upset that she wasn't in there. So now I went to the Alberta College of Art and Design in Calgary, and I actually studied there from 2001 until 2005. And I was lucky enough to still be at the school with Norm Faulkner, who actually started the program. And he is a huge mover and shaker in the studio, starting the studio glass movement in Calgary and North America, and took a real counterculture, sort of abstract look at how to use glass as an art material and medium, and was more interested in the conceptual side of things rather than maybe the exact finite craft of things, which I actually really enjoyed. Once I graduated in 2005, with two friends that I went to school with, we started Bee Kingdom Glass, and it actually ran from 2005 until 2020, and it was an art collective, glass art collective in Calgary, and we applied for a lot of grants and did fine art shows and did a lot of production. And that was just a really informative experience in my life, again, going for 15 years. After I graduated, I actually went back to now the Alberta University of the Arts and did a master's. So now they have a master's in crafts program. And in the image here is Natalie Rodriguez and myself. Natalie was the head of my thesis committee and has been a good friend. And if anyone's interested in doing a master's in craft, I highly recommend it. Some of the other organizations I've been involved in are the Alberta Craft Council, and I was lucky enough to be a founding member of Berlin Glass in Berlin, Germany. It's a non-for-profit public studio that does outreach to the community and works with artists to make their own work. So I lived there for about a year helping build and open that studio. I'm also on the board of the Glass Art Society, which is now an international organization. And if you're interested in going to our upcoming conference in Corning, New York, it's next year at June 3rd to 6th, and I'll be there. It's going to be a lot of fun. And we've also taken on, the Glass Art Society has taken on the International Festival of Glass in the UK, and that's coming up in August of next year from the 27th till the 30th. And it's a more, the Corning conference is more based for artists, and the International Glass Festival is more public outreach. So they're both really great things to be involved with. So during my master's, I was looking at how I really found a home in the glass community and a place where I felt like I belonged. And I started looking at the queer qualities of glass through queer theory. And if you're not familiar with the liberal studies idea of queer theory, it's basically the idea that looking at a queer lens of things being different and individual and everything is unique. So it's fairly ethereal, but for me, the qualities of glass, it's always moving, it's always changing, it's almost magical, and it seems to be alive. And one of the things that I found really interesting is just the material of glass to make it transparent. It's actually an amorphous solid. So when it solidifies, it's non-crystalline. So it's actually random, and it's the randomness of the molecules that make it clear. And I looked a little bit at Jane Cook's work, and for a number of years, she was the chief scientist at the Corning Museum of Glass. And you can look them up. They have a number of great talks on YouTube about how glass is a queer material. I also looked at Victorian glass worlds, and I found it very queer how glass has shaped the whole world around us, and it's become so ubiquitous that it just blends in with everyday society. And really in the Victorian times when glass became more of a common material, it changed the way we viewed the micro and the macro. So looking at telescopes and microscopes and mirrors and windows allowed us to see through reflections and view ourselves in a different way, which allowed for an openness and a new way of thinking, which is also to me a queer quality of difference, creating change and openness. Um, Also, when I'm blowing glass, the one thing that I think I really fell in love with is every time you're making something, it's a different experience. The material is so complex when it's molten that it's always in flux and it's always changing, which is also queer and I think is a great metaphor for just the human condition in general. And I love the drama of glass blowing, and also there's a danger and urgency. Now, the one thing I loved about learning how to blow glass through the program at the Alberta University of the Arts is we were taught to look at glass through a sense of play and possibilities of what you could use glass for. What can it do, and not trying to think of it in a rigid way. And I spent a lot of time at Pilchuck Glass School when I was younger as well. And so the studio glass movement in general really pushes towards using glass in non-traditional types of ways. And a huge inspiration for how I was looking at queer theory is this great book, What's the Use on the Uses of Use? And if you're thinking about queer use, I love this image on the front of the book. It's actually a post box in the UK, and there's a sign that there's birds nesting in there, so you don't use the box. So the birds are using that post box in a queer way, which is basically the same way I was taught to look at glass. And if you are interested, definitely check that book out. Also, in the idea of queer theory, there's a lot to do in the do-it-yourself movement, because you have to build a place and make a place for yourself. And the studio glass movement and a lot of other craft movements in North America, that's what we all had to do. So in here, there's an image of myself, Tim, and Ryan, and my brother building Bee Kingdom garage in the middle, and then there's Norm Faulkner uh, starting the glass program at the Alberta University of the Arts, and then a picture of the starting of Pilchuck, and just going and doing it, not knowing exactly what you're doing, but just trying to make a space for yourself to explore what you want in a group. The other thing that I find queer about the glass community, rather than just the material itself, is this idea of wanting a stage to perform. I think glass itself is such a vibrant material that's really theatrical and extra. And I think anyone that gets involved with it sometimes takes on those traits or has those traits already. So it seems like we like to build stages for glass blowing studios. And that's also a huge thing about Blown Away, this sort of platform where we can show the drama of the material and the making process and the danger and the theatrical aspects of it. And a lot of studios and different institutions that I've been to, performance has become a part of the culture of the studio glass movement. And it seems like we're always sort of wanting more. And some of the performance groups that inspired Bee Kingdom and myself are the Butter Eaters, the B Team, and the B Team are going to be featured. They're a performance glass group that is reconvening, and there's going to be some talks at this year's glass conference in Corning. So this idea of performance really made me make a correlation between the drag community and the glass community, and how there's these sort of centers, just like at Sheridan or Espace Vert and Pilchuck Glass School, there ends up being these sort of houses of glass, just like there's houses of drag. And so I looked a bit into the drag community and made that sort of connection in my head. And also spending time at Pilchuck Glass School and another school called Build Work. I've also been a part of a lot of fundraisers that include dressing up and sometimes dressing up in drag, which I just thought was really interesting. And to me, glass ends up being sort of a material that can inhabit all of these different forms. And it ends up being sort of this idea of dress up in my head. So I think maybe there's a correlation there. And if you've never heard of Build Work, it's runs seminar summer courses and it's in Germany in the Black Forest. And they do lots of different mediums, sort of like Haystack does on the East Coast of the US. So if you haven't heard of it, look it up. That's me and John Moran, the winner of season 3 of Blown Away, at a fundraiser. I'm looking very beautiful there. And I just wanted to also do a shout out to Laura Doniford, who started the Glass Fashion Show. And we're also going to be having another Glass Fashion Show at Corning this year. So just this wild sense of play and dress up. And I also saw a lot in the glass community, a lot of things around the idea of camp and taking things very seriously in a non-very serious way. So it's both reverent and irreverent, and I love that sensibility, and I feel like it's in a lot of my work. So coming into the work that's actually featured in the show is it's very much based in uh, the place I live. So this is the Rocky Mountains, it's Lake Louise, and a picture of Calgary. And way back, I believe it was 2011, I was invited through the Calgary Stampede to be a part of a project called the Artist Ranch Project. And they wanted to take artists that didn't usually work in Western themes out into the wilderness and to think about place. And when I was preparing this lecture, I actually found out where I went, and I didn't remember this, was called Home Place Ranch. And it's a bit of a dude ranch, which is fine. But we just got to ride horses and sort of think about where we lived. And one of the ranch hands, who's pictured here, I can't remember his name, but he was really worried about the city encroaching into the natural landscape. And that just really got me thinking about how can I sort of represent this idea of, you know, keeping this natural landscape pure, or what does that mean? And one of the ideas that I thought of was inspired by these magic grow capsules. You might have had them when you're a kid. They're these little sponges that you throw into water and they expand into animals and things. And I'm like, well, how can I make my own? So these pieces, especially since Calgary is a real boom and bust city, and I was thinking of value. So I made this golden city and this golden mountain. And the idea is if you're needing any of those things, you can go and throw them in your uh, nearest pond or river and sort of grow your own golden city or golden mountain. And there's just sort of a daydream of an idea of what that even means and what I'm looking for in where I live. So these pieces, they were blown and then flame cut and polished and then put together. And I built the moquettes on the inside with different mixed media. This one is wood and plaster and glitter spray paint. This has a lot of plaster as well that I cut into and painted. And then I moved on to this Wildland Rocket series, and I've always loved science fiction. And um, also for myself, what I really fell in love with glass was just being able to play with the material and really get into a state of flow. and taking some of the seriousness out of worrying about how things may work out, and being able to also bring this back into making these maquettes and this idea of sort of like a ship in a bottle. They're just really fun to make. I've thought about making the interiors out of bronze, which I might do in the future, just using maybe a little bit of a highbrow material, which maybe might be better for my pocketbook in terms of having them collected. Although I have had this series collected, five of them by Elton John, which was really exciting. But they're just a real joy. I can fall into making my own little worlds. And I also love being able to work on pieces in and out of the studio because glass time is so expensive and there is a lot of pressure there for things to work out. Where when I'm working on the maquettes themselves, I have more time that I can work on something a little bit and then come back to it and on it a bit. I also really like trying to figure out how to put them together. So the way that they're affixed into the glass at the bottom, the black part, is it's actually a drain plug, and you can get them at different sizes. And there's a wing nut in the bottom, and you twist the wing nut, and it compresses two flanges and pushes out the rubber in between so it expands. So you can twist that and then seal it into the glass. And the real trick is just making sure I can fit them on the inside. And for this show, the piece that I see as being really sort of foremost, um, and sort of at the top of my list, if I could only choose one piece that could have gone into the exhibition, I'm glad to be showing everything else, because a lot of my work sort of fit this idea of finding place and finding a home. And dreaming of what that could be is I made this piece as my remembrance of my childhood treehouse. And it was a real inspiration for me in terms of sort of what I'm sort of trying to get back to, I feel like, when I'm making my work, in terms of with even though being in a tree and glass blowing can be seen as a very different thing, as a kid, when I would be in my treehouse, the wind would be blowing through and everything sort of seemed alive. And I really felt in the moment and a part of my surroundings. And with glass, I feel a lot of the same way, I feel like. And so it's this sort of yearning for a time and a place that, maybe didn't really exist because now it's full of nostalgia. Um, but it's sort of a dream of the world I would like to inhabit. And I built the tree out of copper wire and a lot of glue and different paint and glitter, and also decided to make it gold just to sort of emphasize my feelings around that space and time. So in conclusion, I sort of feel like there's a really amazing aspect of materiality, and I don't know if it necessarily needs to be glass, but I think it's really specific also to the crafts in general of creating community and finding place in a material, something that is not human, but has human attributes and can bring us together uh, in a really inclusive way. And I think there's a lot of hope in building community through material. And if you're interested in glass, it has a really great, strong community because, especially for glass blowing, you need to work in a team to make work that's of any sort of complication. And yeah, thank you so much. And I will unshare my screen.
Thank you so much, Philip. That was a very insightful presentation, and thank you for providing us with such lovely foundations of the queer material culture of glass. That's so interesting. Thank you for that.
Yeah, you're
Um,
welcome. Yeah, I didn't know if I'd be able to fit it. I have a longer version as well, and I kept trying to cut things down. I'm like, no, I'll just talk. I'm sure I can do
When it's something
it.
you've studied, it's hard to know, like, what should I include? What is the vital, Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so
Well, and
much.
I definitely is I'm definitely a bit of a maximalist, so it's hard to cut down. It's one of the things I was criticized for during my master's, like focus, focus. It's like, no, I want it all.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so thank you so much, Philip, for your presentation. Now I would like to open up the floor to Kat Hart for their presentation.
Perfect. Thanks so much. Okay. So before I start sharing my screen, I'll just tell you a little bit about me and my practice. I'm joining you folks today from the stolen and unceded homelands of the Coast Salish people, including the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. And my work, it explores place, belonging, and home, and I try to explore those ideas through the specificity of the materials that I'm using. So I think a lot, not just about form, but about the origins of my materials and their histories, and their locatedness. And through my interest in materiality and place, I've tried to sort of develop a more sustainable and accountable and site responsive approach to my work. Other than ceramics, I also do a lot of alternative photography and printmaking, some film, and also land-based sculpture. There's really not a medium I've met that I don't like. And I just kind of try to use the method that makes most sense to explore the materials and their relationship to the land. They're usually very laborious processes, and that really gives me the opportunity to slow down, to explore how the origins of the materials evoke meaning, and to celebrate the unexpected results of site-specific material. Um, I think issues like the ones showcased in this show around housing and the affordability crisis are so bound up with issues of capitalism and colonialism and not being in right relationship with the ecologies that we live in. And so I think a lot about being a good neighbor, not just to the humans in my communities, but to the more than humans as well. Um, and this thinking, I just want to acknowledge, has been massively influenced by Indigenous knowledge keepers across Turtle Island, who I've been really privileged to listen to and learn from, particularly in my local world, Weiss and her daughter, Sinakula. Also just reading Robin Wall Kimmerer, and my instructor at Langara College, Splash, Erin Nelson Moody, has been a huge influence on the way that I approach this work. I think another orientation I just want to flag is also kind of a queer ecology approach, questioning heteronormative assumptions and binary thinking and the primacy of humans over non-humans or more than humans. And it's an approach that sort of rejects the more mainstream ecological way of thinking about like what is natural, what is called natural. So that's just a bit of a orientation to my approach. And now if I can share my screen, I'll tell you about the work in the show. So my presentation is going to be about rodents, which hopefully you're already aware of if you're coming to this talk, and hopefully you're not squeamish. But if you are squeamish, that's a pretty common reaction to mice and rats. Especially when seen swarming together as they do in the pieces that I have in this show. Living in Vancouver on stolen and unceded Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh homelands, I'm pretty familiar with the sight of rats and mice scurrying through the streets. I've had to set mouse traps at home, and this particularly well-fed looking rat on the screen here was living very happily in the storage area under my deck for a while. Keeping pests out of our homes has been a constant struggle for humans since we stopped moving around and became a mostly stationary and agricultural society. This is particularly the case with mice and rats, who have adapted to thrive in human spaces. The impacts of sharing space with rodents varies hugely based on socioeconomic location. So while mice and rats are everywhere in urban environments in particular, people who have the closest contact with these creatures tend to live in buildings that are poorly maintained. And for those who are unhoused, there are few options for keeping food secure and animals out of tents. In Vancouver, where I live, the rat population seems to be on the rise. When I applied for this show, local news agencies were freaking out about footage that had captured rats swarming outside of Burrard SkyTrain station in the downtown core. Some people blame the apparent growth of rodent populations on the banning of second-generation anticoagulant rodenticides, which is a particularly brutal and slow way to poison rodents, and which was banned because it also inadvertently kills birds of prey like owls and raptors, and potentially also cats and dogs who eat poisoned animals, and could even pose a danger to children. So not a great way to go. Other people emphasize that removing food sources by securing trash and properly maintaining buildings is the only way to really control a rodent population. But that's a pretty tall order in a city known for its slumlords and sky-high housing costs. While humans struggle with the cost of living crisis, mice and rats continue to thrive, taking up residence in our walls, attics, and basements. Chelsea Gardner Hemsworth, who wrote a chapter on bringing more of an ecosystem approach to urban rat control, notes that rather than viewing the city as an artificial landscape completely under human control and the rat as a foreign invader of our territory, we need to see the rat for what it is, a wild animal that shares the urban ecosystem with us. And she also notes that it's increasingly being recognized that chronic exposure to rats can have significant mental health impacts, particularly among impoverished city residents. And it's been shown that rats can elicit fear, anger, stress, worry, and exhaustion, as well as sleep disturbances and avoidance of activities, for example, urban gardening, that could lead to rat contact. So I don't want to downplay the significant mental and physical health impacts of interacting with rodents, particularly for our unhoused and underhoused neighbors. That said, I hope to bring a little bit of levity to this issue through my work as I try to complicate the binaries of human and non-human, nature versus culture, or pets versus pests. So my approach has been to try and bring together examples of domestic items, of homeware, decorative items, a tea set in this case, and just cover them in mice. From a distance, these vessels are recognizable as highly decorated ceramic vases and homewares. You see on the left here, a wedding cake even. Things that might be very familiar or welcome in domestic spaces, but upon closer inspection, the mouse details become visible. This can elicit a sense of fear or disgust. One rodent might be cute, but a swarm can create a sense of intense discomfort. Similarly, a mouse outside could be acceptable, but in the home is immediately unwelcome. My pieces start out as press molds that I made from real mice. They weren't wild and I didn't catch them myself. In an effort to enrich our cat's life and to make her feel like a predator, we sometimes feed her frozen mice from the pet store. And I borrowed some of her stash to make these molds. You can see the original mold captured some really great detail. You can see like the detail of the fur there very clearly. The mold I'm using these days is pretty old and could probably use a refresh. I mostly use it just to get the general shape of the little mice and then add the details later. And I should give huge props to my instructors, Devon Knowles and Gloria Han, for their guidance and encouragement as I was starting to work with these forms while I was in school. So my process usually starts with a structure, a thrown vase or a hand-built form, which I then have to painstakingly attach hollowed out mice onto. I prefer using the press mold to slip casting because I need the forms to be pretty robust so that I can contort them into different shapes to kind of slot them together and make this this pattern of like a writhing mass. But I think it's really the tails that bring a lot of movement, and they're added last and are definitely the most fragile and precarious part of these pieces. And as I've been working on these pieces, I've been thinking a lot about the materials I use and their ecological impact. As I said earlier, I'm really interested in working with local materials as a way to connect more deeply to the land, and to be able to have some agency around my decisions and the materials I decide to harvest and my impact on the ecologies that they exist in. Most of the wild clay in BC is low fire and very high in iron. After some experimenting at different temperatures, as you can see on the left here, I found that this clay, when you fire it to cone 10, actually kind of melts into quite a lovely matte purpley brown glaze. Particularly a clay that I harvested from the Nanaimo area on Chemainus and Nanaimo homelands. And I've been trying to think through how best to work with materials taken from unceded Indigenous land, and the ethics and responsibilities around that. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. I should also note here that Shadbolt Center for the Arts, where I fired these pieces, have been just so wonderful, and I'm so grateful for their advice and wisdom, particularly with my many, many glaze tests. So as I was thinking about how to glaze these pieces and I was thinking about local materials, I was reflecting on the fact that mice, rats, and invasive plants also have succeeded in establishing themselves in areas, at least in part due to colonization, as humans in search of new homes have intentionally or unintentionally brought flora and fauna with them. And sometimes that's had really devastating impacts. So our ability to control the spread of this life through rodenticides, through pesticides, continues to have major impacts on the native species in these areas. And it can be easy to ignore these impacts and just close our doors to our homes and leave the wildness of nature outside. But then sometimes it comes inside to join us. So whether we understand animals or plants to be pests, it's specific to culture and time and place, which I find really interesting. That creatures or plants that are celebrated in one context can become invasive or overwhelming in another context. And similarly, colonial governments and profit-driven companies can view as pests plants which are important foods and medicines for Indigenous peoples, as is the case. An issue that we have locally in BC is the spraying of the herbicide glyphosate, which is used to kill off plants, a lot of native plants and trees in areas that are being used for industrial forestry. So I've been volunteering with an organization called BC Wild Bird Trust for a little while, and they're a conservation and birding organization. And I've been assisting them with the removal of invasive plants from the land that they steward, which is Maplewood Flats, you can see in this image here. Adjacent to Maplewood Flat is the Tsleil-Waututh Nation community and village site. And the organization has in recent years been trying to work to find ways to collaborate more with Tsleil-Waututh and ensure that local ways of knowing are honored and shared in culturally appropriate ways to promote reconciliation. So one of the plants that I was helping to remove from Maplewood Flats was cattails. And cattails are actually native to BC. They're a really important plant, but there is a new invasive cattail that's much more aggressive and has taken over a lot of the waterways, and it's become a real problem. So we were trying to remove that from the flats to open up the ponds for bird wildlife to be able to use. It was the cattails were so thick that you couldn't even see the pond in the beginning. And you can see the image on the right here is after we cleared out most of those cattails. So I've been working with plants for a while, thinking about using plants as a way to connect to land, particularly native plants. But then I started thinking, well, native plants are still so important to local Indigenous communities for use as medicine and food and for cultural activities. So I started to move away and think more about focusing on invasives as they're so often removed as part of conservation efforts anyways. And so through the folks at World Bird Trust, I was able to take home a bunch of this invasive cattail, along with some English ivy, Scotch broom, and blackberry, which we removed from the site to use in some glazing experiments. I should say I'm really still quite a newbie when it comes to glazing and in particular ash glazes. And I probably would have never embarked on this path had I had a sense of how challenging it was going to be. Again, huge thanks to the techs at the Shad Bolt for their guidance, particularly Jay McLennan, who was game to fire my many testers and give lots of advice. So when you're working with materials that are hand harvested from the environment, you're never going to get the kind of consistency that you kind of rely on in glazing and creating a glaze recipe. I burned and collected the ash of the cattails, the ivy, the blackberry, and the Scotch broom. And each plant has a different chemical makeup with wildly different amounts of silica, amongst other things. And I had no idea what that precise makeup was going to be. So that made creating a recipe very challenging and just involved a lot of trial and error. It was also really interesting how I shifted from seeing the ash as like a plentiful resource because it comes from invasive plants that we were removing to seeing it as a really precious resource because of how long and the seasonal nature of harvesting and then drying and then burning and then collecting the ash. So I was really, yeah, as I was doing the testing, I was just seeing my stash of different ashes dwindling and thinking about the next time I would actually be able to go out and remove invasives and be able to burn them, given what we now have as wildfire season in Canada. So I tested the ash, washed and unwashed with the addition of local clay, with the addition of silica and some other feldspars, amongst other things. And I also tried firing them in sagas in a wood firing, which produced some pretty cool, if inconsistent, results. And then these are just some of the test balls that I fired. And as you can see, wildly different results. Depending on the type of ash, whether there's wild clay included, the feldspars, but definitely some really exciting colors happening, which was very encouraging. And the tile on the right here is the recipe I ultimately decided to continue working with, at least for the cattail ash. And one of the reasons that I was really interested in working with cattail, aside from the fact that this invasive variant is causing a lot of problems in local waterways, cattails are also really great bioremediators. They're really good at taking up toxins and removing them from the soil. And Maplewood Flats, before it became a bird sanctuary, was used as a dumping ground. And so I was really curious to see if the cattails were removing toxins from the soils and storing them in the plant, and what impact that would have on the glaze colors. So you can see some of the variations here. The plates on the left and the ones in the middle, they are all cattail ash glazes. And the top two are made using the cattail roots, and the bottom two are struggling here, are made using the leaves of the cattails. You can see the bottom ones are quite a bit sort of brighter and more vibrant. And I think that's likely because when the plants remove toxins from the soil, they tend to bioaccumulate and concentrate more in the leaves. So if there are metals being removed from the soil, it would be in the leaves more than in the roots. The middle two pieces also had some local clay added, so they have some of that iron green color, while the other two are more sort of bluish. And then on the top right, the icy blue one is made from English ivy, and the bottom right one is made from Scotch broom, which behaved very differently from all of the other plant ash. And interestingly, it fires quite thick and matte compared to the runny glossiness that you usually get with ash glazes. And in these close-ups, you can see some of the color differences in more detail. So these rodents, these pests, I wanted to combine them with these invasive plants that we're constantly trying to stop from overwhelming everything. And ultimately, my hope is that these pieces help to trouble the dichotomies of what is wild, what's domestic, what belongs inside versus outside, what's human and what's nature. And to encourage an understanding of our homes as shared ecologies that we have to take responsibility for, particularly our impacts on these ecologies. And that is the end of my presentation. Thanks so much for listening.
Thank you so much, Kat. That was so interesting. Like, I knew you had harvested plants from the environment to include within your ash glazes, but I had no clue that different parts of the plant could create such a different result. That's so interesting.
Yeah, super neat. The science of it is fascinating, and I'm just starting to scratch the surface. So yeah, really
Seems like
cool.
there's a lot that you can research. That's amazing. At this time, once again, thank you so much to Philip. Thank you so much to Kat for those amazing presentations. They were both so lovely. At this time, we're going to open up the floor to any audience questions that there might be. If you have any questions at this time, please feel free to put them in the chat. Otherwise, I have a couple of questions I wouldn't mind getting started with. We are a little bit limited for time, and I'm going to be respectful to our artists. So if you have a question, get it out now. But both of you, you talk about different and distinct ideas in your own practices, but there are some things that link. I know, Philip, you were talking about how you experience the sense of belonging within the glass community, and you were kind of examining, okay, well, what does that belonging look like? And Kat, for you as well, you were sort of talking about how we distinguish what belongs in our ecosystem. So do rats belong in our apartment buildings? Do rats belong in our cities? And I was just wondering how you feel our understanding of belonging has shifted with both human and sort of non-human or more than human habitats being under threat so often these days. I was just curious how you felt about our sense of belonging as a people. I'm sorry, that's quite a big question to ask.
I can chime in. I don't know. I think it's interesting. I really enjoyed your presentation, Kat, and I just watched the Nature of Things Beavers from Above, and it was all about beavers moving into the Arctic. And I think it's so interesting as the world changes around us. Like, not only are we responding, but all the animals around us are responding. And that line, especially what you were talking about with cat, and it's something I'm interested in as well. It's like we are a part of nature, but we're also this huge driving force. And the one thing I found really interesting about the series Beavers from Above is they are such an ambitious animal as well, and they go in and change things, and they're now disrupting roads and things, and they're quick. So then it's like they also have a right to do that. So I think it just becomes so multi-layered and complicated. And I think that's where, in some ways, whenever I'm getting really maybe stressed out or worried, um, I think I just sort of go like, well, we don't actually know. Like, sometimes the solutions that we come up with or make more problems than they fix. And so I think I don't know. I think being nice to ourselves in some ways, like trying to do something is important, but also like allowing ourselves to also know that we don't know it all is sometimes, maybe it just helps me sleep at night. But it's very, very complex, but I think that's what makes it fascinating and so inspirational. But you can definitely fall down like a rabbit hole for sure.
Yeah, I
Absolutely.
totally agree with that. Yeah, I think it is so complex and our ecologies are so complex, and we're just really beginning to understand how we impact the ecologies we live in and how they impact us and how we're so interreliant on one another. And I think this binary where we imagine that we are outside nature, that we go to visit nature, like it's um it's nowhere near that simple. And as we try to yeah, even in conservation, I think is so interesting as we try to make positive impacts. I think that's a really important point, Philip, that like we have to be really cautious because we don't know the repercussions of the kinds of impacts that we're going to have. I read a really wonderful book on pests. Um, I think it's just called Pests, and I'm temporarily forgetting the author's name, but it's all basically about all the situations where we've tried to sort of like, oh, we're having this ecological problem, so we'll bring this creature in and it will deal with this. And then suddenly, like, you have an explosion of that particular animal. Even just thinking about like removing blackberry from Maplewood Flats, one thing that the folks there found very quickly is Scotch broom. Um, its seeds can stay viable for something like 80 years. Um, and the thing that was stopping it from growing was it was shaded out by the blackberry. So you remove the blackberry and suddenly the broom is able to grow, and then you've got Scotch broom everywhere. So it's like yeah, these knock-on impacts are going to happen. Um, and yeah, we have to be, I think, really cautious and really respectful that the spaces that we're in, a lot of other creatures also belong there too. And just, yeah, being cautious about kind of one-stop solutions that we think are going to fix everything, because that's never going to be the way.
Absolutely. Very much so. There is a history of especially in the wake of colonialism, this idea that we can kind of control our natural environments more than we actually are able to. Um, with the indigenous ways of knowing and indigenous ways of tending to the land, before colonization kind of happened, we had these really wonderful ecosystems and pathways and communities that were maintained by the indigenous populations only as much as was ever needed. And they didn't really step outside any bounds in any attempt to really overly control the landscape, but rather trim things back, keep things working, keeping things moving smoothly, but without, detriment or sprawl. But we've kind of lost sight of that with the need of we need housing for all of our populations. And, who am I to say that someone cannot use, a rat trap in their home when I'm sitting in my home without, rodents? Is it fair for me to say that to that person? Perhaps not. But is it also fair for us to disrupt these ecosystems that we're living in? No, it isn't. And it's a very, very delicate dichotomy for sure. And I appreciate both of your insights into that. I just wanted to ask one more question, and I hope we have enough time. You both kind of touched on this a little bit. Philip, you talked about all of the communities you were able to kind of make throughout your journey as an artist and communities you were able to be a part of. And Kat, you were also talking about this idea of sort of restoring the lands perhaps to a way that they once used to be. And, you know, we're living in an era right now of a lot of displacement, and that is both ecologically, but also socially. There are a lot of groups of people who are being ostracized and are not allowed to integrate in our various communities for whatever reason. And we're also facing an age of climate collapse. And I'm sort of wondering, to both of you, what it might mean to practice homemaking as like a radical or restorative act to these communities that we're missing, but also to these landscapes that have gone missing. I'm curious how you see homemaking as radical, because you both seem to do it in your own ways. And that's hard because it's like, what does home mean to you? Is home a place? Is home a feeling? And it's hard to kind of quantify that in many ways. I know for myself personally, something that I'm really radically trying to do in terms of my own homemaking is making these social nets and these social communities for which we can rely on each other to kind of navigate these issues that we're facing.
Yeah, and like for myself, I feel so like I'm definitely privileged where I live because it's just me and my husband, and we live in a suburban home in Calgary with a lot of space. So even during that time, I was able to really still have my own space and a yard to garden and dig in. Um, the one thing that I feel like is that I keep thinking about when I'm involved in discussions that are online like this. I think um, even though I would love to have gone and seen the show in person, just in terms of my own travel, being an artist and traveling a lot, I worry about how much that's having an impact and being able to create community, and especially as my involvement with the Glass Art Association, I always am just amazed that we're able to communicate across such vast distances and create a community without having to be directly in front of each other, which is still like my favorite thing. I'm definitely more of an extroverted person, and being in a lively environment with lots of people, I love, but I'm just my husband's out of town. I'm working from home today. So this is like one of my big social interactions is online. So I think that's really powerful, and I find hope in that because it is easy. I think, especially as a maker, even though a lot of my practice I have to work with others, there's still a lot where it's just on your own. So you have to be okay being on your own. But community is also something that I know brings me a lot of meaning. Um, so I don't know. That's a tough it, and I think it's interesting how just it can be so radical. Just getting along with different people of different views and meeting people from different backgrounds and not just following your algorithm on your phone of what you're being sort of end up seeing. But I'm not. It's a tough one. Everything
Oh,
is
for
sort of
sure.
becoming so siloed. I think that dances around things, but you've definitely got my brain going. So
Yeah, absolutely. Most definitely. Yeah, it does feel like a lot of different communities are siloed off like that, and you only see the specific communities that your algorithm chooses to engage with for whatever reason. You don't see all of the other things happening outside of your own spheres. So it is interesting.
Mhm. Yeah, I was thinking as you were doing your presentation, Philip, how like the constant references to the people that you've learned from and the communities that you've been working with, and I feel the same about kind of the clay community in BC and across Canada. And I mean, I say clay because that's sort of one of the pieces we're talking about here, but I find it in other artistic communities as well. But the ceramics community is a particularly nice one, I think. And just yeah, the generosity that I find in those communities of sharing knowledge, of not kind of, I think sometimes in artistic spaces there can be a sense of like the solo brilliant artist, the individual who like has done all the things by themselves. And really I wanna I don't really want any part of that. I want the community space. I want to share the knowledge. I want to recognize how much my practice benefits from hearing from other people and other cultures and the way that they do things. Um, and I think, yeah, that piece that you were talking about with not wanting to travel so far or like worrying about that sort of impact, I think a lot about as well. And it's part of the one of the reasons that I'm really interested in focusing locally and digging in more into my local communities and the connections I can make here and the land that I can work with. Because I mean, the world is so huge, and I'm kind of interested in more in going deep and the relationships that that can build. And yeah, that real sense of home that can be created by knowing land so intimately and knowing like, oh, that tree that I go and visit every time I go on this walk, and how sort of yeah, the more than human around us become familiar neighbors through doing that. Yeah, those are some of the things that I think about a lot.
Thank you
And
so
I
much
think
for sharing that.
it's the power also of the craft medium.
Mm,
Like I love being able to use under like try to learn a material, but because of the complexity and how expensive it is, I think it creates these communities out of necessity, but then you can
mm,
really bond over the material. And since it ends up being such a complex process, I think it's really easy to nerd out too. And it's fun
yeah.
to be able to get excited and see, like, even just seeing, I don't know much about ceramics, but seeing all of those different glazes and things, I can just see how that would just draw you in to want to and get other people excited, like, oh wow, this is really interesting.
Hmm.
And I love how it's still connected to nature and natural processes, but is outside of, in a lot of ways, maybe human complication. And I think that's maybe where,
Mm,
it hopefully, I mean, there's always still barriers in terms of people being able to access a community through costs. That's one thing with glass. And I'm sure
yeah.
with ceramic, like it costs money to be able to do, but it's outside of a lot of other human complications, and I just would hope that I see I would hope the crafts could be something where it can continue to create community and bringing together around something that is meaningful and exciting. But yeah.
Wow. I really love having these exchanges with other artists and other folks who are thinking about these topics. Because as you see, we are quite like-minded in a lot of the ways that we do seek out community. So thank you so much to both of you for sharing your thoughts. Thank you so much again as well for those amazing presentations. We are so grateful to have had you here with us today. Beyond the Threshold, the exhibition is on view at the Canadian Clay and Glass Gallery from now until January 11th, 2026. Once again, we are very grateful to Armstrong Fine Arts Services as well as our special anonymous donor whose contributions have been able to make not only this online talk happen, but have made the exhibition possible as a whole. So thank you very much again to Kat and to Philip for being here with us today, as well as to all of you who have joined us here online. We do have one more online talk with Lorianne Thibodeau and Indira Singh, who are also part of Beyond the Threshold. This online talk is happening on November 27th at the same time, 12 p.m. EST. So if you're able to join us, we'd be happy to have you there as well. Thank you so much again, and I hope you both have a wonderful day.
Thank you
Bye-bye,
so much.
everyone. Thank
Thank
you.
you.